Jen Schneider, the Eugene H. Fram Chair for Applied Critical Thinking here at RIT. And this past year, Teaching and Learning Services, Rebecca Johnson and I have partnered to put on a few Teachers on Teaching events to really have conversations and up the ante, if you will, on our ability to do high-quality teaching related to teaching students how to critically think, analyze, and actively learn. And I have to admit that somehow, and I can't imagine how or why, Professor Dina Newman, that's going to present today, was off my radar until Rebecca brought her to my attention. And when I did a little more investigating, at first a little clandestine, you know, you don't want somebody to know that you're checking it out, I became more and more impressed. Dina is really well known for her work in innovating a classroom, in reforming an evidence-based teaching. She likes non-traditional format education, so I thought that was fabulous. So how did she?
So the first thing I'd like to do is ask you why you came. So I've got, if you could just jot down an idea or two on an index card. And I'd like to invite those of you who are sitting off to the side, please come join a table, okay? I am going to make you talk to each other, so come sit where you can talk to people. This is an active activity here. So.
I'm Pat.
Nice to meet you. I'm Margie.
Margie.
If you've finished, I'll collect the cards because I'd like to see what you have to say. Thank you.
Yes. So the first thing is how to arrange the tables.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you. All right.
That's not how I learned.
Okay, so basically what I'm seeing is that you guys are all interested in trying to get some new ideas for your classroom, make your classroom more engaging, improve sort of the dynamics and so on. So that's great. That was what I was hoping we could focus on today. So I also want to say, are you guys familiar with these terms? So raise your hand if the term active learning is a term you're familiar with. Okay. Does anybody want to just give a quick explanation of what that means? Anybody? Yeah.
It's a process whereby the students actually do more stuff in the classroom rather than passively sit there and absorb all my wisdom.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's basically in contrast to passive styles of teaching where the student's just sitting and listening. It's trying to get the student to actually actively engage, do work, And actually, there is no such thing as passive learning. What we know about the brain says that in order to learn something, you actually have to be actively engaged. But so we often talk, I'm going to use active learning a lot today, and it really is a way of just saying that we want to get the students engaged and working hard and have them be the ones who are trying to think about things and work through things instead of you just telling them stuff. Okay? How about inquiry-based? You guys familiar with that term? Raise your hand if you're familiar. Okay, so a lot of people are not familiar. Anybody who's familiar want to explain it?
Well, in this case, the student is even more an independent actor on the stage and doesn't follow some set syllabus of here's your learning objective, what you're headed for, but goes deeper and deeper into a subject they're interested in. And they define every objective they go for.
Okay. I mean, you might, as a teacher, define the objectives, but it's going to be a lot more, there's going to be unknowns involved, right? And so I agree the student is taking much more of an active role in figuring stuff out. If you think about how you do research, right, that's an inquiry-based process. We often, in science, want to get our students to do inquiry-driven activities as well. Are you familiar with the term constructivist? Raise your hand if that is familiar. Okay.
Heard it, but
Not sure what it means. Okay. Jen, do you want to explain it?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to explain this, but in my view, it's really about learning through putting different concepts together, on it, actually constructing them into a new reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, it all goes along with the same idea. The student is constructing the knowledge. Okay. So while you may be guiding them, you're guiding them to construct the knowledge for themselves. When you construct something for yourself, you learn it and retain it much better than if somebody just tells it to you. So it's trying to get students to put things together themselves instead of it all being prepackaged and handed to them. Okay, how about peer learning? Is that a familiar term? Raise your hand if that's familiar. Anybody want to take a stab at that one? So yeah.
So I would say for that one, we're really working across a peer group to try to put the learning together. It's not driven by the instructor.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to get your students to actively engage is to put them into groups and get them to talk to each other. And they actually can help each other learn that way. And just getting these discussions going is one of the best ways for students to learn. So, and sometimes students are a little bit reluctant at first because they think their peers don't know anything and you're the only one in the classroom who knows anything. But you can get them used to it, and eventually they will learn to value the discussions that they have. And student-centered, is that a familiar term?
Is there anything that's not student-centered?
Yes.
Like, honestly.
So there's student-centered versus instructor-centered. Instructor-centered is when I stand up here and all the focus is on me and I'm delivering stuff to you. I'm giving you everything. It's the same thing as like what we were calling a passive lecture, right? If I've made all the slides and I'm just telling you what to do, it doesn't matter who's out there. I don't care. They don't matter to me. It's all about me, right? It's about the work that I put into making my beautiful slides and the knowledge that I want you to absorb, whoever you are. Student-centered, the focus is on the student. And so in a student-centered classroom, really, you're trying to get the students to work. You're trying to get the students. You should know everybody's name in the room. You should be walking around talking to students all the time. The focus is on them. And in many of the newer classroom models, I know you were talking about a potentially new building, they've actually redesigned the classroom so that there is no podium and screen up front, but there's whiteboards all around the room, screens all around the room, and it's specifically made so that the professor doesn't have a spotlight to stand in. It's walking around conversing with students because they're the center, not you. Okay. So that brings me to another point. So in your classroom, who's working the hardest and talking the most? Is it you? Is it you? Okay. Whoever's working the hardest and talking the most, that person's learning the most. Okay? You all know that the best way to learn something is to teach it, right? When you prepare your lectures, how much do you, the first time? You learn a lot, right? You're having to synthesize all this information. You're putting it all together. You're maybe going and reading outside of sources to try to figure stuff out. And then you have to communicate it to students in a way that they can understand. So do you want you to be the person learning the most? Hopefully not, right? Hopefully your students are there to learn, not you, okay? I mean, it's great if you're learning too, but you want the students to be working and talking, and that is how they're going to learn the most. So that's my philosophy in terms of all of my teaching, is to try to transfer that from me to them, to you. Okay. All right. So I actually have a little exercise for you to do. Some of you may wonder, do these active learning strategies actually improve? I'm going to give one of these to each table, if you don't mind. So you may be wondering, do active learning strategies actually improve student learning? So I'm giving what Rebecca's handing out right now. Each table is getting a figure from a paper that was published a couple years ago. And it's the data that made these figures comes from a meta-analysis of 225 case control studies of active learning interventions. So what that means is that they searched the literature, they even searched for things that were not published, and everything that made it into the study had to be case control. In other words, it was randomized who went into each group. There was a same assessment being given to both groups, and there had to be active learning in one and lecture or non-active strategies in the other, okay? So I've given each table a figure, and what I'd like you to look at is examine the figure your group was given and try to dissect what you're looking at here, okay? So you guys are all smart people. You can do this. You can use Google if you want to. Discuss amongst your group, what exactly is this figure showing you and what does it mean, okay? And then be prepared to talk about it. I have a second copy of everything if that will be easier. Would that be easier?
But I can try and figure that
I don't
out.
know what happened to the other one.
Oop, there was something on the back on the other side. Oh, no, maybe I'm looking at the back of that article. Okay.
It's okay.
Oh, we got more copies?
These are so fun.
So these are student fun. Size of them.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Looking at value rate.
Wait, no, they were supposed to have that one.
Oh, they're supposed to have that one?
You guys are supposed to have this one. Oh, sorry. This was the second copy that these guys. You guys had, if you need a second copy.
It's a little more complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if these are the same. Like I said, I sold more pages.
Maybe that's somebody with a statistic that we never learned about in Stats 101. What do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. It's a statistic.
I'm not really getting the meaning of these lines and numbers.
Okay, so what do you think they might be trying to show us here?
These might be the number of students that are involved in
Okay, so remember we've got 225 studies that this is doing a meta-analysis of.
Okay. So these are studies.
Mm-hmm.
This total numbers would come to roughly that.
Okay.
Okay, so you add these two numbers up and you get
So what do you get
225.
from this, Ren? T25, what's that?
225.
Oh.
225.
Is that split up by all? Yeah.
So now this
Yeah.
range here from.
So each one of these
1.5 to
represents,
1.5.
well, would these all add up to
0
225?
must
No?
have some like range.
All right. What I'd like you to do now is one person stay at the table you're at and send the other people to the other tables.
What's this? You gotta break the tables. One of
Okay.
us gotta stay and the other two gotta leave. Okay, well, you've got our son, so I'm gonna
All right.
you to stay on the island.
Doesn't matter as long as you're not at the same table as other people. All right.
I'm a safety guy.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
I should have made more copies of the color. But I did make a copy of the full paper for you guys. You can see the full paper here. The figures that you all discussed are in the full paper, okay? What I'd like you to do is explain to the people at your table what your figure basically showed and what you guys thought about it in your group. So share your previous discussion with your new group. Okay? And you can use this to point to stuff.
But that data was different. What? But the data we got at the end was different.
That's right. You all had different figures.
Moving, you got stuck having to explain.
Okay.
Essentially a measure.
Oh, we got two hedges G's now.
So you had hedges G over there, and now you've got it in a different context over here, right?
Oh, geez. Well, let's see what it says. Heterogeneity analyses for data on examination scores, concept inventories, or other assessments.
When they went to active learning or even the active learning, the failure rate decreased, right? So this is the percentage or change in failure rate.
Like 8%. Or even 50%.
It's probably physics. It's probably physics.
It's always good to pick on the physicists.
Yeah, we can always pick up.
Yeah. Well, and what I learned recently was there are universities that just accept everybody.
That's true too.
So I didn't know
Accept
that.
everyone?
Everyone.
Okay.
So at that point, some of the freshman classes probably do high failure.
Failure rates.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I've taken classes like that. As a
Where
freshman even.
everybody
Well,
just goes in and
Where,
then...
where the class started.
Even if I was teaching Leo,
So you can share the figure that you discussed as well. You can show them what you were, because they have different data than you do. Okay. So you guys can share what you, if you open up to the figure. Did any of you discuss the first figure? Any of you in the group that had this figure?
Oh, we're supposed to
So
discuss
all
that.
of you discuss, so you can share with each other. So somebody, is somebody in the group from this? No? Okay. Somebody from this one.
Yeah, 3 of us.
So why don't, you're supposed to mix up, but that's all right. So the idea is you can explain to them what you saw, they can explain to you what they saw.
About this.
Yeah,
Okay, what did you see in this, Ren?
So we explain this.
yeah.
I think it's the number. They decided what failure was.
Let's
Outliers that can be thrown out, otherwise.
Well, it has more spread.
Right, but only 2 studies,
It's not the actual failure rates from the
right? Less relevant than those two.
Yeah, except that, you know, the mean is still over here. It says the fact that it just not confident because
And, you know, this model may not be as predictive as we
what did you
would
get at?
like. So we wanted to get into more of the individual
Well, on that one.
data points that then fed these.
So does this help you seeing how this kind of supported that? No? Okay.
So maybe part of this is sort of related to our
What we found here was that,
Can I take one of these? Is that all right?
what we found was that,
So this is the color version
If
of
my
that. Since
control group were today, what's the color group?
There's that one.
Okay, and what's our assignment here? Is this involved in our?
We'll get to it.
Okay.
But anyway, so whatever the control group is, so this group showed a larger effect relative to the control than this group. And this is just a class size issue, so the smaller the class, the larger the effect, although positive in all cases. I'm not really sure how they're, I assume that's just instructor written exam versus concept inventory, but
Do you guys know what a concept inventory is?
yes. Concept inventories are validated assessments based around individual concepts. So, I mean, I think they mostly come out of physics about 30 years ago where they had concept inventories.
Positive process,
very big swing.
decreasing student failure rates.
Yes, yep.
That's really all I got out of it.
I find it interesting that they found so many ways. The same data.
Yeah, people make a living at just magic.
Oh, the studies, yeah.
showed improvement with a professor made exam. And 22 of them looked at
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with the term concept inventory?
we looked it up.
Okay. That's good. Use your resources.
So
So why do you think there's a difference?
We think that, well, we decided there was differences is that well, are you familiar with this? When it says exam, is that like an exam that the professors make? We just think professors are bad at making tests that actually
could be.
measure whether students learn or not.
Yeah,
But when you have like a standardized test, it shows very
Yeah.
clearly that they learn more.
that's right. And a lot of times professors write tests basically, so there's been a lot of work that shows that often at a low level in terms of understanding. So for example, I told you this in class, you just have to tell it back to me, as opposed to synthesizing something new or putting together lots of different things we talked about in class, you know, going a little deeper into application or something like that. So concept inventories are really designed to get at the deeper concepts, whereas instructor exams are all over the place, right? But for the most part, they're more based on what did I say in class rather than what's the concept I want them to know.
Yeah.
I really wish, I wonder, I don't know if we have those for
Which-
industrial engineering.
There are
I would love to have
some in engineering. I'm not sure about your specific field, but I could try to find out. All right. So you guys didn't have the benefit of having somebody who already thought about this figure, but maybe you could work on it together since you didn't have that.
modest if we're looking at examination scores, concept inventories, and other assessments. But they also changed the y-axis on us, so you need to think about that a little bit.
Nope. So, did you guys discuss this one?
We're about to get to this.
Okay. Do you know what a concept inventory is?
That's something that we were discussing on that table.
Okay. Did you find out what it is?
We found the definition. It looks like a test that is going to examine how well students understand about different concepts by asking a series of questions. But really
Yeah, so these are validated assessments that should be valid across, any institution. That's not specific to what you said in your class. It's more, these are the deeper concepts we want students to understand. They're written in such a way that it's been checked that students can't game the system and figure out the answer from the clues in the question, things like that. They're really written to get at the things that experts have agreed are really important for students to understand.
So concept inventory is not what the students believe, it's what the actual truth is about that particular discipline.
It's a test. It's a test to find out how students are doing in comparison.
Inventory was just that, a list of
concepts. It's actually,
is that not true?
no. It's a bad name, I think. It's a bad name. It's a test. It's an assessment, and it's based on
Like a depression inventory, a depression screening tool.
yeah, something like that, right? Yeah. So what they started in physics 30 years ago or something, and they were basically these are the misconceptions we know are really common among students. We ask them a question, and the answer should reveal, do they get this concept, or do they have one of the common misconceptions, right?
So then, some kind of discipline could have a list of common misconceptions.
Right. And so this is a test to get at that. So if you look at, now you can discuss that figure, maybe that'll help.
then what is the exam here? Is it
So that would just
regular
be,
exam?
just something written by the professor, which have a lot of flaws, as you can imagine, and are very variable, because anybody can write their own test, right?
Well, it's probably, I assume,
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, that's my tool
All right, so I want to wrap this up. What did you guys, does anybody want to share from your group what you felt you learned from looking at the data here?
We're on the right track, going after active learning.
Okay. All right, good.
I wasn't as convinced.
No?
I wasn't as convinced. Lots of the data that we've seen is sometimes things get better. Sometimes less people fail the class, but then other times there are large increases.
Large
Okay.
increases in people failing.
Yeah.
Where'd you see that?
That's on the one that looks like this.
Large,
Okay.
large increases.
How often do you see that?
Not that often. Well, if you count the lines that are pointed down and the ones that are pointed up, there's a lot more pointed down, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it's not like a fail-safe strategy.
Right. Oh, that's right.
No, it's not fail-safe.
Some folks execute it better than others.
You need more detail than is in
Yeah, there's more data.
Okay.
Because this could go south. If you don't do this right, you could actually make things worse. There's lots of evidence that it could get better, but it's possible for you to mess this up, and I need more information.
There are probably students that are, if you give them some freedom, are going to just play with their iPhones.
Right. So as you guys were doing this, what was I doing? Was I sitting back here playing with my iPhone? Yeah. So what I was trying to do, and this is where the instructor is really important, is to find out, to promote the conversation further. So asking people, did you find out what Hedges G is? What is it? Make sure you're on the right track, because in order to analyze a couple of those figures, you needed that information, right? Or did you, what did you think, asking okay, well, there's this comparison between concept inventory and exam. Do you know what a concept inventory is? Why do you think that you might see this difference between a concept inventory and exam? I'm not telling you the answers. I'm asking you to think about it and come up with it on your own. So you can do active learning strategies poorly, where you're not really either not interacting with the students at all, or just telling them oh, this is what Hedges G is. This is why there's a difference between concept inventory and exam. If you asked me something, you probably heard me ask you a question back, right? I didn't give anybody any information. Okay, so that's one of the tricks to kind of making it work. This is the, you might have noticed if you looked at the front of that article. They make a very strong statement. It says at the very end of the abstract, the results raise questions about the continued use of traditional lecturing as a control in research studies. Okay, they're saying that's not even a valid control anymore. We know it doesn't work at this point. Support active learning as the preferred empirically validated teaching practice in regular classrooms. So basically what they're saying is that they're making this very strong statement that all this data shows that the best way to teach is through active learning, at least in science and math classes like they analyzed here. Now, I've heard the authors of this paper go even further, and they say that, you know, if this was a clinical trial and we would have had to take the students off of the control medication, which is the passive lecture, right? Because it's not working for them. We know it's unethical at this point to teach that way. Okay, so that's what the authors like to say. All right, so I want you to think about, so you've seen that this is probably effective. Now, what are some examples? I'll just give you something to write on here, but what are some examples of some student-centered approaches that you have used or experienced? And I'm really interested in hearing what you come up with because, like I said, I'm just used to science. So try to jot down some ideas here first. Okay. Think about your classes that you teach or that you've taken in the past where you felt like this was actually happening. All right, and you can talk to each other, ask each other what you think, share your ideas. And just to be clear, I'm very flexible, you know, student-centered, active learning, inquiry-based, whatever you want to call it. You know, just anything that's not passive or not instructor-centered. And I'm just looking at the first question right now. You don't need to go beyond that right now. So once you have some ideas, talk to the people at your table and share your ideas. And maybe that will promote you to think of other times that you've seen something similar.
Okay. Well, I'm teaching predominantly. Oh, I'm Mark.
Your experience with student-centered learning.
So most of my students come in with some sort of business notions because everybody's been in a business situation before, whether they bought a stick of gum or whatever. So as I say, I hold them responsible for what's in the book. They should get the foundation.
So I want to get into what you're all here for, which is to actually work on something of your own. So just as a little background, some of the things that I've done, Jen mentioned that I've you know, done a lot of different sorts of teaching in my classes. I teach 3 courses, Intro Bio, Genetics, and Human Genetics, and I've revamped all of them to be completely student-centered and not instructor-centered, to be evidence-based, whatever you want to call it. My Intro Bio class, I don't do any lecturing at all. Every day, and I've reconfigured it so that instead of having lecture and lab, which is the traditional way, we're in one room 3 hours at a time, twice a week. It's the lab room, but I do the lecture type activities in there, but they're all activities. They're all mostly model-based activities where students. So like I have physical models of molecules and processes and things for students to work with physically. I have discussion things for them to do, all sorts of stuff, reading papers. And then their lab part is an authentic research project, so it's really inquiry driven. I've changed the project year to year, but this year they were looking at changes in the microbiome of the soil in an old orchard on campus compared to a control field. So it's a question that's unknown. I don't know the answer. I've never done this before. We got to figure it out together. They work on figuring out protocols and designing experiments. And this is for freshmen. My genetics class, I use a technique called CREATE, which I would be happy to talk to anybody about. It's a fabulous idea. And the idea is, so what I did in this class was I threw away the textbook. I don't teach genetics from a textbook at all. I teach it from the primary literature. And I've selected 5 papers that we dive deep into, and we do analysis, deep analysis of the papers, and the concepts that I want to teach in this genetics class come out in context through the primary literature. My human genetics class I just revamped in the fall, and I again got rid of the textbook. I'm not a big fan of textbooks. I don't think students read them very much or get much out of them. So I selected more contemporary readings that are about science, that are about genetics, that have more of the human element in them, and more, they're just more interesting. And I had the students read those, and again, getting at the same concepts, but through something that's a little more interesting to read. And then all of the activities that I do every day in class, I do some sort of active engagement activity in class. I just tried to, but you don't have to revamp your whole course, okay? I revamp my whole courses, but you don't have to do that. I'm just trying to give you an idea of some of the stuff that I do, and if you're interested in any of those things, I can talk to you more about them. But you can make small changes right now. You can go in tomorrow to lecture and do something more active than what you had planned. So this is just a small list of some of the things that I've done in my classes, just to kind of give you guys some ideas of what you might do. These are all things you can do in a one-class activity, okay?
Dina, what is Help from Mom?
Help from Mom, yeah. So Help from Mom is one of my favorite activities. So MOM stands for Most Often Missed. So when my students take an exam, I take like the 5 or so most often missed questions before I give them the exam back. I put them in groups based on, I try to make it so that somebody in the group got it right, but not everybody. And I make them discuss the question, and then each person has to write out what they think is the right answer and explain it to me. And if they get it right, they get bonus points on the exam. Now, I give really tough exams, so my scores tend to be really low, and this is a way of actually bringing up the average. But it really is nice because it helps them get those really tough concepts that people were really struggling with. By the end, pretty much everybody in the class is getting all those right, just by talking to each other about it. And I go around and I give them hints and stuff. I mean, like I do like what I did with the activity you did earlier. You know, I say, oh, so what were you thinking about that? And, oh, what do you think? You know, and just try to push the conversation without telling them, yes, that's the right answer. And they love it, okay? And it's very, it really engages them, and they want to get those bonus points, so they love it. Jigsaw is actually what you guys just did. So what you did is it's called a jigsaw. It's where you have people work on something as a group, and then you take the members of the group and you split them up and mix them around. I don't know if there's anything else here that is not familiar. Anything that on the list that you guys want to hear about? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So one of the games that I did last semester, it was really fun. So we were doing human evolution and thinking about the different hominids and stuff, and that can be really boring if you're just trying to memorize which species went with which traits or whatever. So we did the dating game, and I gave students, so they were in groups, and each group got a profile of their contestant, so they were, one person is like asking the questions and the other people are the contestants who are trying to win their affection. And so they had to kind of figure out, the one who was asking the questions, that group had to figure out what questions they were going to ask to be able to figure out what the other people were. And then the people in the other groups had to figure out what kind of answers they might give, knowing that you were Homo erectus. If somebody asked you, what do you, if we were to go out for a romantic dinner, what would you can think about what they might say. So that was a lot of fun. The students loved that. And again, it's just a way of trying to make it more engaging and more, put it on them to figure out, what Homo erectus would have been like as a person. Or as a potential date. Yeah.
Are you familiar with any literature that says active learning enhances online learning
We were
experience?
just talking about this. Yeah, so online is always harder to do because you're not physically with them and they're not physically with each other. The best active learning, of course, is peer group work. And you can facilitate that. And so Rebecca was just telling me there's another workshop this afternoon.
I'm at a faculty meeting at noon, so we have full video audio now. We can put 50 people face to face with audio. We have a new platform. It made me change my delivery. When we were using Adobe, it was this unidirectional talking head thing.
Yep.
The platform we're using now, it's like you're sitting in front of the class and you can see everybody.
That's great.
And so I've been encouraging the faculty in the online program to say, hey, you need to take some time and encourage a little more interaction in the class and breakout groups or whatever.
I think that's great, yeah. I mean,
I'm not sure.
I've done a little bit of stuff, so like I've done Skype meetings online where like we're discussing a paper or something like that, and we just try to organize a time when everybody can be there. And actually Blue Jeans, which RIT uses, is actually really good for that. You can have up to 9 faces at a time kind of on the screen. I've also done, one of my projects, if anybody's interested in this, I do what were called interactive video vignettes. So we make these like 15-minute or so videos where trying to take the passive watching a video and make it active. So I start with concepts that I know students struggle with. So this is all based on research and what common misconceptions are and so on. And then we develop a little scenario that always involves undergraduate students, so their peers kind of trying to solve some problem in biology. So we make this little story, and throughout it, the user is asked questions, which you cannot advance until you answer the question. The student is asked to make predictions, to help collect data, to analyze data, we have branching where like if they answered this, they might go to this page. If they answered that, they go to another, or bring back their prediction and say, okay, well, you said this was going to happen, and this is your data. What do you think now? And stuff like that. So there's stuff you can do online, and I think we're just starting to learn how to think about online teaching. It's a new field. I haven't got a lot of experience with it.
Good.
But I think the principles have got to be the same. It's got to be student-centered. If it's just you giving them tasks in isolation or giving them, you know, information, it's not going to be engaging and they're not going to learn much.
There are ways to, well, what I loved about Dina's talk is it's just try a thing, just one. Really, it's just one small thing can make a big difference in an online course. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, and for me, you know, I think I started with one thing at a time, and now I got to the point where I just blow up an entire course and start from scratch. But, you know, I think you can do just, like, I'm going to just try something this week. And so you're wondering probably, how do I start doing that? So my best advice is what the literature says is you should design your class backwards from the way that most people design them. So instead of saying, this is what I want to teach, now let me think of what the assessment's going to be, right? You should think about, from the beginning, what are your learning goals? So what do you want your students to be able to do or understand? So if you think about a lesson that you already have, why are you delivering this to them? What is it that you want them to get out of it at its core, okay? So you need to just sort of distill that out, and then you design the activity to match that, okay? So here's some examples from my own classes. So for example, I want students to be able to explain and apply the process of DNA sequencing. That's a really important thing for geneticists, molecular biologists to be able to do. So the activity is they have to build a model that explains how DNA sequencing works. Okay? Instead of me just telling it to them, I find that they learn it a lot. They really understand it when they're putting the pieces together themselves and figuring stuff out along the way. Another one, describe the relationships between DNA, genes, alleles, and traits. These are terms that are really important and that students get confused between all the time. So I have an activity where I have these analogies, and I make the students really explore the analogy and think about what are the relationships between these things. So, you know, DNA is basically a form of information. So I've got other sorts of forms of information, like a recipe or an encyclopedia or a musical score or something like that. And they have to figure out which of these things really matches that. And then if, for example, if the recipe is the gene, what's the protein? What's the, you know, what would be evolution or whatever. So they can really explore that analogy in many different ways. Another one, my genetics class, you know, they want to design a study. I want them to be able to design a study, right? I want them to know, how does genetics research work? So they should be able to figure out if a trait is based on genetics or not. That's a really important thing. So I take this paper that does that, and we break down the paper into all the parts and try to figure that out. So those are just some examples. What I'd like you guys to take a few minutes now is to think about your own course, okay? Think about one of your lessons that is not currently student-centered or active or inquiry-based, or however you want to think about it, or isn't as good as you think it could be. And try to distill out first, what is the primary learning goal? Okay, why are you doing this in the first place? What do you want your students to get out of it? And then once you've done that, we'll move on, but work on that first. Everybody has a lesson in mind and some learning goals? At least one learning goal? Okay. You can start this on your own, but I'd like you to really work on it with the group. So discuss with your group what your different lessons are, and then pick one to start working on, okay? So you're all in different fields. I know it will be, I don't know anything about your field, but you'll be able to bring some perspective, I think, to be able to help each other think of something different than you're used to. So brainstorm about different ways that you might be able to teach that same idea. And I'll put back up the list of techniques that I've used, because it might be helpful to you. But share what your lessons are, and then think about, even if it's just something small. Are you guys all familiar with clicker questions? Right? Clicker questions can be a really easy way to transform something that was just you telling students, and instead you're asking them and you're making them talk about it and coming to some consensus. So that's a really easy one. There's a million other things you can do as well. Case studies and whatever, okay? So share your lessons and start thinking about suggesting to each other ideas.
I don't lecture, but I like that mom idea. Like,
Subject lesson.
Understand those definitions better, so maybe I can do some in-class exercises about.
so, but what are one of these concepts? Or
The concepts.
Text and like I was giving it all to them. This is my first time doing it, but I don't know how to turn that into them doing it as easily. Instead, because I took it the next step. So before it's always here's what goes in your results, and at least this time I showed them what goes in their results.
Okay.
But then how do I?
So have you ever considered giving them some sample papers?
And that's what we were doing.
Asking them to distill out what's in these. I do that with my freshmen.
Okay.
And then try to kind of pull together the whole class to have a discussion and write up the good stuff on the board so that, you're capturing it for everyone.
Do you use previous student work, or do you actually go back to the literature?
You could do either. I do kind of a little bit of both.
Okay.
The paper I teach freshmen for that course, so it has to be really easy stuff but I want them to read some papers anyway for the project that they're doing. So I kind of give them I give them like 3 papers and say, what do you notice about the abstract? What do you notice about what's in the introduction? And then I'll prod them with some questions like, where do you find all the citations? Where are the majority of them? They should be able to say, oh, yeah, most of them are in the introduction. And so you can kind of lead them down what you know is important already, but try to make them find it.
Right. And that's the direction we're moving.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure if there was something more.
Yeah. I think they'll resonate to that.
And if they found it themselves, they're much more likely to remember that because they found it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
To go through and find just the right papers.
That's always the hard part, right? Is getting the right materials.
They're out there, and sometimes I've used papers I don't think are as good. And
Part in and out of the machine with, another week you're talking about fixed guards that are around the thing, another week you're talking about light curtains that you turn off the machine if you put your hand in. Yeah, so I'm thinking what I want to do, at least on Friday of this week, is take
Or
that
do you
same
need
machine,
all of it before you can
just
move
take
on?
that
Is that what
machine
you're asking?
and
That's a good
do
point.
kind of an abbreviated version of what we do in the machine course as, the whole course. Take a few minutes and talk about the hazards, a few minutes and talk about the risk, and then a few minutes and talk about suggested controls. And do it in groups.
And they know ahead of time this is gonna go on.
A little low-key after dinner, with a night class. All right, everybody get up, and then they look at us, she's serious, somebody will finally start the dialogue going. They kind of jokes.
When they're correcting it, they don't get an answer.
Dinner. And then I really
Can
get
they
them.
work with others too and be like, all right.
I don't specifically say they can't, but I don't specifically say
I
they
tell
can.
them,
So some take it as I've got to do it myself, but someone really isn't whether it's learning correctly. It's either learn reading, struggle, and get through that. Does this hold water, does it make sense? Right? It's the second time through and they get to see how somebody else approached it.
right, and you're not just.
Do they close the loop with the other
Do
student
they,
at all?
can they go back and talk to them when they're
Yes.
grading it and be like, what
No,
did
when
you do
they're-
here because I
when
don't
they're-
understand
Then they come
it?
back in the class.
And then you pair them up.
Rotate, pair twice, because it's not, that's the other thing that I have learned with this, is I don't go, Joe, give your homework to Jim, Jim, give your homework to Joe. Right? That they don't explicitly know who's got it until they come back. And I don't, actually.
So how do you facilitate that?
So I was talking about one of the biggest leaps in critical thinking, it seems, is that students cannot fathom how to check to see if something that they have put together holds water. Does it make sense? It's a
That's really tough.
concept. And so one of the ways that I have whacked it trying to get to that without taking up an enormous amount of time in the classroom is having homework passing and recorrecting. So they'll do a low stakes homework with a few problems. They bring it in, and then I collect all the sheets and I
just
randomly hand it back out.
okay,
And then the
randomly.
next day, they come in and pair up
With
twice
whoever got theirs.
With whoever got theirs, and then, but you have to do it a couple of times till everybody gets through it. And they can say, well, what'd you do here? And I intentionally don't give them an answer sheet, because I want them to work through it twice and go, well, what did he do here, and why did he do that? And that was different than me, and, so they're really looking at just a handful of key questions more than once.
Do you give them some sort of a scaffold of things to look for as they're going through them?
I do when they do the homework the first time. Here's some hints to think about, but I intentionally don't when I ask them to correct it.
'Cause I've done something similar, and in my class, I don't take two classes to do it, it's the same class, but they bring something in that they worked on. I have to give it to somebody else, and then I give them some pretty vague but open-ended questions for them to write down. So they have to write down, like, did the things that they wrote, are they factually correct? Did they use facts properly? And then the way that they wrote it, is it clear? And trying to get them to try to look at those two things sort of